Welcome to the Windows Computer and Technology channel. And it's funny because this is something I see all the time. I saw another comment like that just moments ago. And I want to talk about one thing that a lot of people have the impression that it shouldn't be because they have the latest, greatest hardware. So, one of the comments that was a little earlier is on his computer, Windows 11 crashes all the time, and he's got a high end machine, which doesn't mean anything, by the way. Same thing for, one of the comments I've seen quite regularly. I've got the latest hardware, brand new laptop. It has the latest, CPU specs and everything, and Windows crashes all the time. So Windows is crap. There is one thing to understand about hardware is that when you buy, if you shed the money and buy really, really new hardware, the latest CPUs and graphics adapters and that motherboard is the latest model from whatever manufacturer. That thing needs to be, it was tested, but that thing needs to be in the real world for a real test. And the real world comes when you buy that PC. There is a known fact that people that buy the latest generations of everything often run into more problems than people that actually have some hardware that could be a year or two old. It's very simple. The reason why is because of the time for that hardware to settle down, if you want. So when actually a manufacturer makes hardware, it will have tested hardware in its own environment, and it's not going to have tested that hardware necessarily enough for to notice that some of the drivers might actually be bad, or that some of the software they added with the PC is bad. It's not that the hardware is bad; it's just that it's so brand new that it takes sometimes several different drivers to finally settle down and have a stable machine. So when people tell me that, it's like, yeah, when you buy something that is too new, it is possible that there is some problems, and it's not Windows related. 99% of all crashes are not Windows related. People have the impression it's always Windows, and it's not. It's very, very rare that Windows actually has a crash by itself and that is Windows related because of some bad code. It's almost always the third party software, the drivers, and in some cases, some faulty hardware. It is possible. That exists, by the way. Faulty hardware does exist. And faulty hardware is very difficult to pinpoint sometimes because it can, crash at different times and different ways and give so many different error messages that you can't even pinpoint what's happening exactly. So you got to be very careful with that, as it is not a proof that everything's great if you got the greatest, latest stuff. Often, what I will say is, when you've got a hardware that's been running well for more than a year or two, and the drivers are fine and everything looks fine, you know what? That's great. That's great. Just leave it like that. It means that the drivers have settled down. The latest drivers are good. It's not always the best idea to update drivers. Sometimes it depends what the update's for, because it can happen, and people as gamers know this. It can happen that NVIDIA or whatever company releases, a driver, and suddenly some games that work perfectly fine suddenly start crashing. Once again, it has nothing to do with Windows. It has to do with the driver that they actually sent out makes some stuff crash on PCs. So it doesn't really mean anything whether you have a high-end machine or you have a basic machine in terms of crashing or not. And like I said, if you buy the latest, greatest hardware, not only are you spending way too much money because it is very expensive, but also the biggest problem that you'll have is often you'll not be satisfied because you'll have more crashes than the average PC because they haven't yet done the drivers that are perfect, that work really well. And you will need to wait, and that settles down over time. After 6 months, a year and a half, you notice that your PC suddenly doesn't crash anymore because they found the right combination, they fixed the bugs. And BIOS is something that, or UEFI BIOS is something, the firmware on your PC, not to be neglected. That can cause a PC to crash a lot if it's not well written. Updating that UEFI BIOS firmware is actually a really good idea. But be careful with a way of thinking that is flawed, thinking that because I got the latest and the fastest hardware out there, my PC should crash less than people that have purchased a PC that has 4-year-old hardware. Actually, that 4-year-old hardware has been, tested. And it's been tested to a point where all the drivers and the software is fine and works great. Sometimes it doesn't really pay to have the latest, greatest. It might be better to have maybe be off by a generation or two. It all depends what you want to do. And, you're saving money. When you buy the latest hardware, it's way too expensive for what it is and not worth the money most of the time. So we got to be careful with that flawed way of thinking about hardware. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up, and thank you for watching my videos.